my main task today. And so we're ready. It's already 4:03. So we'll start in a few minutes, literally 2 minutes. I think there is another setting for the room, so it's a bit okay. It's a good balance. And so thanks a lot for joining us in person and online. So where are we? This is the FCA seminar series, the Financial Computing Analytics Group seminar series. And so we, as a group, we try to work in area of the theory of complex systems, network science, probability theory, statistics, mathematical finance applied to econometrics, if you want, in economics and finance. And in this seminar series, we try to have interdisciplinary talks that use these methodologies maybe in different areas, or they work in the same areas with different methodologies. And we try to kind of steal ideas from an area to the other and kind of cross-contaminate the different areas and kind of develop new methods for our problems in economics and finance and discover new problems. I guess for today, I mean, it's really exciting because I think this is really an expanding area for research in reinforcement learning, but in general for the way we can relate this to economics and finance, of course, is the world of agent-based modeling and how agent-based models could be improved or changed by reinforcement learning and machine learning. So, I mean, there is a lot of, and in the other way, as the speaker would say much better than I can, how economics and agent-based modeling world can kind of help inform simulations in reinforcement learning as well. So thanks again for joining us in person and online. So the recording is already ongoing. So without further ado, I invite Joy Leibo here. So the floor is yours for the talk, and thank you so much for coming here today. And yes, let's start the seminar for today. Thank you very much. I'll just connect this with the charge, and hopefully nothing will explode. And so that, yeah, so we'll be
okay. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for that introduction. So I have a talk here called Emergent Bartering Behaviour and Multi-Agent Reinforcement Learning. So from the title, you can see that it has something to do with economics and finance, maybe, but it's actually going to take me some time to get to the title of the talk. I kind of structured this in a way that it's mostly the introduction and kind of why we did what we did, eventually getting to what we did. I think that's the most interesting way to do it. I'll spoil the ending immediately and say that the actual results are basically entirely surprising. And I think it's interesting that it worked, but there's nothing like mind-blowingly new that we're going to find. So what's most interesting here is more why we did it and how we did it. So I'm going to focus on that and then try to, at the end, say what the actual results were. Because I've made it so kind of top heavy, there's a chance that I will run out of time. So maybe warn me if we're getting toward the point where there's about 15 minutes left, and I'll try to make sure I actually get to the results. But the more interesting part is not the results anyway. So, all right, let's see if I can switch slides now. Maybe not. Let's see. That works. Okay. So these lovely and brilliant people are my collaborators on this project. All right. So I want to just start with some jargon that I may use and just get it out of the way so I don't accidentally forget to define my terms. So these are words people throw around a lot, at least the first two. When people talk about narrow AI, they mean narrow as opposed to general. They mean that's AI for particular applications. And that's what everyone is actually excited about in the places where people want to apply AI most of the time. AGI, artificial general intelligence, means something else. It means that it's got general purpose applications, can be used for AI, can be used for anything. It's often associated with being human-like, though it doesn't necessarily have to be human-like, but those terms kind of often go together. And it's seen as something, so it could be human level AGI, we'll talk about. And then there's our term, which we, our group uses, which is MAGI, MAGI, which stands for multi-agent artificial general intelligence. And all the same kinds of things apply for artificial general intelligence. It could be human-like, it could be human level or greater than human level. And it's sort of an objective that doesn't exist yet. It's just also true for artificial general intelligence. But the difference here is that it's a multi-agent system. We're not thinking about a single brain or a single individual. We're thinking about a whole group or a whole society where there are many different individuals with maybe different levels of intelligence. And there could even be a system that includes some natural intelligence. There could be humans that are interacting in a system that also includes machines. We might think of that as a certain kind of MAGI. But the prototypical thing would be something that's a system with large numbers of artificial general intelligences running at the same time and happening in the same world. And so I work at DeepMind. In case if people don't know what DeepMind is, it's an alphabet company. It works on artificial general intelligence and many other narrow artificial intelligence applications as well, I should say, of course. But in particular, the company was founded in order to work on artificial general intelligence. That's the mission statement: solving intelligence to advance science and benefit humanity. There are 1,200 people at DeepMind now, I think, something around that. And it's a very academic type place where you'll have a lot of different opinions floating around. So since there's around 1,200 people, you probably have around 1,200 different opinions on exactly what each word in that phrase means. And that's kind of the fun of the place. So there's a lot of there's continual discussion and debate about what this actually means and what we should do about it and everything else. My opinion, which is just mine now, and my research group in particular, is that this mission is better served by building a MAGI than an AGI. A multi-agent system will be better for advancing science and benefiting humanity. And that's what I'm going to try and talk about for the rest of this presentation, really. All right, so there are three overarching reasons why I think it's better to aim to build a MAGI than to build an AGI. First, MAGI is potentially more human-like. Second, MAGI is potentially more human compatible. And third, it's potentially more scalable. I'm going to talk about each of these in turn. I'm going to attempt to go through the first two relatively quickly because that's not meant to be what this talk's about. They're an important part of the story, but this talk is meant to be mainly about the third one, which is where I think the economic story is going to come into play. So why is MAGI more human-like? So this is these are slides from a talk I give in other places where usually I'm contrasting with a single agent, a single AGI, singleton kind of view of things. And I start by pointing out that human intelligence is largely a group affair. Most of the feats of intelligence, the things that we're proud of as a species, are accomplishments of groups, not accomplishments of individuals. The lone genius is basically a myth. Most of the time it's groups that are accomplishing things. There's an infinite number of things we could talk about from the literature on human uniqueness and what is different between us and chimpanzees and other animals, and why we are the one that has conquered the earth, so to speak. But this is one study that I really like and I would often talk about that is arguing, is a paper from Herman and Mike Tomasello is the senior author on this paper. And what they're arguing is that humans have specialized skills of social cognition that are different from chimpanzees. And so what they did, the way they tested that was they got together a bunch of, they had 3 sets of test subjects. They had humans, 3-year-olds, chimpanzees, and orangutans. And they gave them all some kind of matched IQ test like things, particular tests that you can do with 3-year-olds and chimpanzees and orangutans. And that's what is written in the corner there. I'll read out some of the names of some of these things. So some of the tests, they're in two different clusters. There's a set of physical tests and a set of social tests. The physical tests are things like locating a reward, tracking a reward after an invisible displacement, tracking a reward after a location change, discriminating quantity, causal understanding of a produced noise by a hidden reward, that kind of stuff. And the social tests are things like understanding communicative cues indicating a reward's hidden location, producing communicative gestures in order to retrieve a hidden reward, following an actor's gaze to a target, things like that. And what they found was that in all of the physical tests, the the humans, the 3-year-olds and the chimpanzees were pretty much indistinguishable. Orangutans slightly worse, but maybe that's not statistically significant, pretty similar. But on the social domain, the 3-year-olds were just way beyond the chimpanzees and orangutans. And so they interpreted this, and what they did at the end of the paper is they articulated what they call the cultural intelligence hypothesis. This is also explaining why they picked 3-year-olds to compare to adult chimpanzees and orangutans. Of course, if you had tested adults, think about what these tests are. They're very, very easy. Adults would be perfect on all of these. The only way you get any variance in the results is by testing 3-year-olds here. So the hypothesis, the cultural intelligence hypothesis, is that humans are much better at learning from one another, probably also more tolerant of being near each other and more trusting of one another. And we have these some kind of initial social difference. And because of that, we're able to learn from each other and then bootstrap all the rest of our cognitive abilities on top of that. We might not be inherently different in the non-social sphere from chimpanzees. That's the process. So, and this has been kind of followed up on by hundreds of other papers in this kind of space where people are interested in human uniqueness and the origins of our cumulative culture, things like that. So I think social things are really the kind of most critical to talk about when we're thinking about AI. We have a question over there.
Yeah. Special communication and for that shift in various components. So the social intelligence is going to be relatively high. So I'm wondering maybe there's a possibility like the way it's how bias human thinking and that's making
Yep. So I should say the question again for the Zoom call, right? So the question is it's so chimpanzees. Some people say chimpanzees do have a lot of social intelligence, and maybe this is maybe the test is biased in some way. Yeah, I think what I put on the slide here. There's no reason to think it's not biased, right? I can tell you the particular group that did the study tends to think that chimpanzees are very competitive, and they were thinking always in terms of a dominance hierarchy, at least male chimpanzees, and kind of they do things like form coalitions and stuff in order to move up and down a dominance, well, to move up presumably a dominance hierarchy, and protect their status and things like that. It's obviously a very complicated field. There's going to be a lot of different things. I think a broad and reasonable view of it is that there's some kind of social difference. Exactly what the social difference is probably up for debate, and you get different answers from talking to different people. When you think about bonobos, it also, as opposed to common chimpanzees, it also becomes interesting in a bunch of other ways. I think that's a whole different talk. We can just take it for granted for now. Yeah, so I can talk about what are these kind of differences? What might they be that humans have that chimpanzees don't? We probably have lots of social cognitive capacities, representations, motivations, things like that, like ability to understand each other's thinking, communicate, have empathy, imitate each other, all these things. It could be underlying differences to tolerance, or it could be other, these things could be secondary, or they could be primary. It's a little unclear. But the point is that these things all underpin our complicated social behaviors, like our ability to have division of labor and specialization, cumulative culture, sophisticated language, norms and institutions, industry. Like I think it's all kind of is built on a foundation of some ability to work with each other, talk to each other, learn from each other, things like that. That was the story on why MAGI is potentially more human-like. Because remember the contrast class, right? The contrast class would be something that is a singleton alone with no connection to others. And that's not how any human really lives. It's like a Robinson Crusoe type AI. Okay, so now the second argument for why we should build a MAGI. Why is MAGI human compatible? So this is the contrast again. So the classical picture that people usually have when they talk about AI safety and ethics and things like that is a kind of a principal agent problem where there's a human and an artificial intelligence, and they're both kind of representatives of everyone, but there's sort of one of each. And people will talk about the alignment problem as how do you align the interests of align what the AI does with what the human wants, and that's seen as the main problem in that area. but it lends itself to really thinking in terms of a kind of a stationary world. It's kind of a single, like, there's only one AI that's optimizing in this picture. And I think it would be, even if we were to build such a thing, we wouldn't end up in a world like that, because we would build more than one of them, and we would have them attached to different people's, they would have to align with different people. So whether we want to or not, we're going to end up with a MAGI from this perspective, just because we build a bunch of AIs that care about different people's incentives, and maybe have incentives of their own even. And I think it's kind of unavoidable in the sense that, like, someone will do that, and the system as a whole, as soon as you've done it twice, then the system as a whole is more like a MAGI than it is like a singleton. So in my picture, there are a large number of optimizing agents instead of just one, and they simultaneously inhabit the same world. We can also see the humans as being optimizing agents. We can see lots of different agents that maybe have different levels of intelligence. They optimize at different speeds, and call all of that one system. And then it's very natural to think of it as a non-stationary thing, because the incentives of one cause them to learn something, which then create new incentives for others. And so it's a structured non-stationarity that happens. There may be equilibria, just like there could be in economics. It's starting to sound a little bit more like an economics-like picture. And I think that's just kind of going to happen regardless. So you sort of are forced to think in terms of a MAGI as soon as you start to think about safety things. And I think also there's important insights from the fields, the social science fields, that think about large numbers of people as being large numbers of optimizers that can be mined here. And AI as a field has a tendency to just ignore all that. We do have ways of thinking about whether optimizing entities of varying levels of intelligence are going to produce good outcomes or bad ones, like market failures or not. And we often think about these things in terms of like public policy questions, like should there be regulation? What do we want the role of democracy to be? But there are frameworks for thinking about this, and we shouldn't ignore all that. And I think it's easier to connect with the social science literature on regulation from a inherently multi-agent view of what AI will be. Okay. Now to the main point here. The third reason for MAGI is that I also think it's going to be more scalable. So, in Paulo's introduction, he mentioned that there's sort of a bidirectional flow of ideas going on, and I really like that image, because I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. So, one way to think about this talk is I'm talking about a bunch of AI methods that could be used for economics. I know this crowd is interested in, or finance or other things. But another way to see it is I'm talking about all the ways in which ideas from economics have influenced our thinking for AI. So it's a bidirectional thing. And this argument is ultimately going to sound a bit economics-y, but it's one for why a MAGI is ultimately a scalable approach. So, okay, I'll start with the status quo for a moment in AI right now. So people are very interested in what they call foundation models. And one thing to know about foundation, so these are the things that the classic ones, the ones people are talking about are things like GPT-3, which is a language model, which you can prompt and it'll tell you, it'll talk to you. And also things like DALL-E, where you can ask it to show and paint a picture for you, and it'll do that. So these are very impressive systems. Now, so one thing to know about them is that they're always a byproduct. That's how they're trained, right? They're trained to do something else that's not the thing that you're ultimately doing with it. Like if you're talking to a chatbot or something like that, it wasn't trained to chat with you. It wasn't trained to chat with anyone. It was trained instead on something else. And then this is a byproduct of that. What it has been trained to do in almost all cases, the language models in particular, is just read the whole internet and predict the next word, basically. And then all of its cognitive abilities arise as a byproduct of that, because in order to predict the next word, you have to understand what you have been reading, and in order to understand what you've been reading, you need to know how to connect information that you just read a moment ago to information that you read 10 minutes ago, and this is and that requires building up the whole kind of attentional architecture, cognitive memory architecture, in order to do that kind of processing. And so that's how it works. And then as a byproduct, then you can do other things like create a chat bot or create something that you can ask it to paint the picture for you or whatever. And it all really works like this. There's a few basic tasks which always have this few things in common. It's always that they have a huge amount of data available, and they have a very well-defined objective. And by huge amount of data, I mean a really huge amount of data. This field of foundation models really got started when people noticed these empirical scaling laws relating these three variables: model size, this is the number of parameters in the model; compute that you apply to it; and data set size and quality. Those three things. And they found initially that as you that these things all kind of scale equally. You can, as long as you don't let it become limited by having too little of one of the others, then you can continually scale performance of language models. And also they have similar things for vision models and other kinds of things. And then they found later that data set size was actually the most important one in a more recent work. So data set size actually is kind of twice as important as the others, it turns out. So data set size and quality, really. And so you can, so noticing these things then told people, oh, we can kind of move out along this curve and pick a point that's further along than they had done before. And that's how we ended up with GPT-3 and other foundation models. And people are scaling this pretty much as fast as they can at every tech company right now. And an implication is that at some point we're going to run out of internet, right? This is this plot I have on the side there, on the right side, is trying to estimate the point at which we will run out of internet. And they have a couple different ways of estimating it in their paper, but in one of them where they restrict to high quality language data, which is what people currently think is the most important. They think we're going to run out of it by like 2027. Like we're going to have models that can absorb all of it, and it'll be, you know, kind of growing faster than people are generating more of it, which is an interesting thing. So to grow further, maybe we don't want to grow further. That already sort of has all of human knowledge in some sense. But if we want to have AI that can like build new technologies and advance science and humanity, as our mission statement said, I think we will need to go further. And I think to do that, you're going to need to have synthetic data in some sense. The system's going to have to generate its own data at some point. It should of course pull in everything it can from the internet, but it should also generate more on its own. But to do that, it needs to have some kind of agency of its own. And that's where we start to think about reinforcement learning. So reinforcement learning now has an agent concept. There's going to be goals and things like that. So you can see this as a way of generating data to train a full system in the end. So this is the picture. I'll do a little introduction to reinforcement learning, I guess. There's two main objects in reinforcement learning. There's an agent and an environment. Agents issue actions, which get passed to an environment. An environment then takes in actions and produces rewards and states, which then go to the agent. States are like, think of them as the observations, that the images that appear on the agent's eyes, as measuring something in the world, the state of the world. Reinforcement learning researchers often think in terms of that sequence that I have at the corner of the slide there, this SAR, SAR, SAR sequence, because that's really what the raw data looks like. It's a sequence of these objects, these vectors. Okay. And then to fully define it, we have a few more ingredients. We have a system dynamics function, which is called transition function, which is just the probability of a next state and a next reward given a previous state and a previous action. So if you were in the state, you take this action, then you will transition to the state. The world will transition to the state. This is a single agent view. And then what you want to do with this kind of system is to optimize the discounted long-term reward, which is called the return. So this is just the exponentially discounted sum of all the rewards into the future. So you care more about things that are sooner. And then another important object is called a policy. This is a distribution of actions given a state. So saying if think of it as a behavior or something like that, because it's saying for every state, what action would you take there? It's a representation of a behavior. And then the expected return from acting according to a particular policy is the value. So this is just the expected return of acting under a policy. So doing a certain behavior will get you this reward expectation. And that's what you really are, many of these models. So there's something made a sound here. I can press admit. Okay. Cool. Okay. So that was just reinforcement learning. Now, all the methods that we end up looking at are based on deep reinforcement learning, which is just the idea that you can kind of approximate any of these parts of a reinforcement learning agent or system with deep networks. They become approximation functions that you use. And then you can compute gradients with respect to them, and you can do credit assignment throughout the whole system where you have complex networks of things. Right. So that's reinforcement learning. Now switching to criticism mode. Remember, I'm going to talk about multi-agent reinforcement learning. In single agent reinforcement learning, even if the world is very large, so it will be non-stationary, it will create lots of data, right? I'm thinking from this perspective, you're creating lots of data to train a network, right? But what will often happen is you'll get stuck somewhere. And because it'll converge, right? Like any process like this, it's going to converge to something. And there are huge numbers of local optima in the world. And so what prevents it from just converging to the closest local optimum near where it is, and then never looking at anything else? It won't create any more data. Once it's converged, it just continues to do the same behavior forever. And you can get copies of the same data forever. So you can get a large data set, but it becomes low quality because it's all the same when there's premature convergence. And what we really want is to have AGI that can innovate new behaviors that it never saw before. So it has to be able to kind of do things that are not along a path that it's already producing. Reinforcement learning people will usually call this the problem of exploration, and they'll see the solution to it as being some kind of intrinsic motivation or curiosity or something like that. So I'll show you how that looks. This is another picture of the basic reinforcement learning loop here. We've got an environment that's issuing rewards to an agent, which has a policy going back to it. And you can kind of unroll it. In this picture, it's just like unrolling it that over time. So I've kind of put along the sign there, A1, A2, A3, so this is how the agent is changing over time as it's getting feedback from the environment. And then I wrote, if the gradient is 0, so if you're at a local optimum, then the agent just stays the same forever. So it just keeps producing the same policy forever. But if it's not, if there is a gradient, then it will change and you'll get new behaviors over time. All right, so the question is, how do we get it to change, right? How do we get something new to happen? So what we can do is we can define what I've been calling a motivation, which is just a change in the environment in a sense. So anything that changes the environment and creates a gradient that causes the agent to then update to something new. That can be seen as a motivation. Okay. And then what mostly people in reinforcement learning are interested in is what they call intrinsic motivations. So this is cases where something flips inside the agent, which causes it to see the environment differently, like setting a subgoal or deciding to be curious about that over there, something like that. Those kind of things. These are called intrinsic motivations, and they change the effective environment. Yeah, let me just get to where I'm going, and then I'll answer that question. So, but the point is, the environment can also change on its own. If you have a non-stationary system, it changes. So maybe something happens, like a volcano erupts, and now the whole environment is different. You have a different set of incentives. That also creates a gradient, which will get you to change your policy if you're updating it for reinforcement learning. You see where I'm headed with this? Is there a question there? Yeah, I probably should have put a subscription. Yeah, the question is pointing out that I have crappy notation here, and I should put some time subscript on the pi there, which is true. Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually not sure what the question is, but I'll try to clarify what I'm trying to do with these pictures here, right? I'm just trying to make the point that the agent has to, something has to happen in the environment to cause a gradient for the agent to change. That's really all I'm saying. That's the main point here. It's kind of in this picture here. So it's a motivation is always a change in environment, delta E here. Okay, and you could see that as something it's like internally generated, where the agent decides, I'm curious about this now, and now it sees the environment differently, so it's going to get different rewards, so it's going to end up exploring different things. And people, many people think that that's the way we're going to solve exploration problems, but I ultimately am going to conclude the other way. Are you asking about the intrinsic motivation story or the extrinsic motivation story? Maybe it'll just be clear if I keep going, probably, I guess. So the environment can change on its own, which will create gradients. That was kind of the point here. You could change your view of it, or the environment could change on its own. And the environment changing on its own is really powerful. And that's what happens in multi-agent reinforcement learning. Most of the time in single agent world, people will say, if the environment is non-stationary, well, we don't have anything we can do about it. It's just, it's like, there's nothing to be said. Anything could happen in the future. We have no way to do anything. And multi-agent reinforcement learning is non-stationary, but not like that, because it's non-stationary in a very specific way that is structured. Agents make choices which create incentives for others, and that cycles back and affects the others, the original ones. And that's kind of the fundamental thing here. It's a way to have a non-stationary world that isn't just like arbitrarily anything can happen. So this is the basic picture here. We have this is a two-agent case, obviously, where you have an environment and it sends observations and rewards, states and rewards to agents, and then agents issue actions which cause the environment to tick in time and change its state. This is called a partially observed Markov game, which is the main thing we're going to talk about. So, okay, so one thing that people sometimes think I'm saying that I'm not saying is what I call as a pejoratively the social is all you need hypothesis. Because people in AI always write papers like, something is all you need. So they think I'm making a social stuff is all you need hypothesis. But that's really not what I'm saying. You could imagine how that would look. Like you could say, like a very extreme version of that would be something like you have 100 really smart, capable agents with no particular needs and maybe just one fixed goal or something that can be satisfied easily. Put them in a room together, and the social is all you need hypothesis would have to say that, well, somehow these things, because they're together, then there would be some compounding innovation there. But that's clearly not what would happen. You need to have some incentive for agents to innovate for it to work. And what you need to have is some kind of environment that creates some reason for agents to have interdependent goals and then interdependent incentives, which create interdependent gradients, so their changes are affecting each other. That's what you need to happen. Yep. It also doesn't mean like, let's just simulate the entire planet and hope for the best. What I really think is that there's going to be ultimately principles of how environments and multi-agent systems interact with each other that will, that principles for how you produce these interdependent gradients and why and when they lead to compounding innovation. And what I want to do is figure out what those principles are and study that. That's what the research program is aimed to be about. So this is now where we finally get toward economics here, because that's where I think that's where where that comes in. So economics is a field that has been studying, and other social sciences too, I should say, have been studying interdependent agents for a very, very long time, and have a huge number of insights that can be mined for reinforcement learning environments. And for me in particular, I was hugely influenced by reading many books by Eleanor Ostrom, and And so her work is very, she's very interested in how the biophysical context is connected to the biophysical context and the people in a place jointly cause incentive structures, like whether there's a social dilemma or a tragedy of the commons or something like that. I always like to take a poll whenever I give a talk. How many people have heard of her before? Let's go. Got a few in this audience. I get wildly varying answers. In some audiences, there's no one has heard of her, and in other audiences, it's everyone. So it seems to be pretty polarized. She's pretty like famous overall. She won the Nobel Prize in 2009, yeah, and so she's an expert on institutions as sort of solutions to problems where there could be a tragedy of the commons kind of situations like that. I could say a lot more, but so a lot of thinking about the kinds of problems she's interested in, like forests, fisheries, irrigation channels, things like that, have led us to create a large number of different environments. And that's what we've done. So we've created this thing called Melting Pot, which is a collection of different environments where you are supposed to slot in agents to learn in it. The agents will be interdependent. Their learning will create gradients for others, and they'll all affect each other's learning. And each one of them is trying to test a particular kind of idea. A lot of them coming out of her work, and some of them coming from other places. Many of them are social dilemmas where there will be some possibility of a public good that no one will invest in, or a tragedy of the commons type outcome where there's some resource that gets depleted because everyone's over consuming. Also more kind of individual things where you could have develop reciprocity relationships with individuals and many things like that. And we think that to do well across this whole suite of environments, you would need to have agents that understood all these different kinds of concepts like reputation, property, fair resource sharing, trust, conventions, norms, things like that. Ultimately, what we want is agents that will invent their own institutions in response to their problems, because I think that's really the most powerful thing that humans do. So one very high level slice over this kind of space is this matrix of goods, economics thing, where there's two dimensions, classification. There's excludable and not versus non-excludable goods, and subtractable versus non-excludable goods, non-subtractable goods. The terminology is all over the map for this stuff. Subtractable is sometimes called rivalry, or sometimes called jointness of supply. Subtractable is Eleanor Ostrom's word, so I use that one. So on the non-excludable side is where you get social dilemmas. These are the kinds of goods that you can't fence off. You can't prevent others from accessing. Sorry, I should say what these words mean. Excludable means you can prevent others from accessing it. So non-excludable means you can't prevent others from accessing it. And subtractable means when you enjoy the good, then it is diminished. There's less of it. So it's the excludability axis that creates social dilemmas. In the think about prisoner's dilemma, generalizations of that type of scenarios arise there. And the examples are things like fish stocks, timber, groundwater, clean air, national defense, things like that. The difference between those two is the subtractability part, where on the top ones, the timber, groundwater, irrigation systems, things like that, they get diminished when you use them. So there's a possibility of depleting them. They're like resource type things. And then there's public goods, which are non-subtractable, where if clean air is something we all benefit from. If I breathe the clean air, you can breathe the clean air. It doesn't affect it. But there's social dilemmas there because people won't invest in building these things or cleaning the air because they hope someone else will do it. And then there's also this axis of excludability of things. Like, so if you have a resource, a common pool resource, then you learn how to build a fence around it. Then suddenly it does become possible to exclude others. And then it's better to think of it as a private good. Examples of those things are like your clothing, your food, cars, parking spaces, things where you can exclude others from accessing them. And we have in Melting Pot environments that fit basically all over this space. We've in most of our work been interested in social dilemmas. So we've spent really the last few years mainly working in the non-excludable side. And so part of the story of the paper that I actually want to talk to you about, I think I've got maybe perfect timing now to get to the results, is we wanted to move around in this chart here and move to the excludable part and talk about private goods for once. So this was our paper on starting to move into the space of private goods. So why think about private goods? From our perspective of, we want to think about how you can build a MAGI, which is like a multi-agent artificial general intelligence that would have compounding innovation, and because of the interdependencies created by agents learning and creating gradients for one another. So in an environment that I'm going to construct here, we can think about 4 layers of compounding innovations. From agent, remember, agents start out with nothing, no knowledge of anything. They're going to be random at the beginning. The first thing that will have to happen is they'll have to learn to produce and consume these private goods. Then they're going to be able to learn to trade them. Then they're going to be able to negotiate better prices, and the particular prices will emerge. And then the coolest result that we had is that they end up learning after all that there's a sort of a kind of merchant-like arbitrage type behavior where they kind of move around and they buy low and sell high, which is an interesting thing. And the cool, one of the interesting things that I want to emphasize about this is that it's really sequential, right? The first, you have to learn to produce and consume first before you can learn to trade, before you can learn to negotiate better prices, before you can learn this arbitrage behavior. And it's not just you, right? The others have to also learn their part, right? If the others haven't learned to create a one price equilibrium in one place, another price equilibrium in another place, there's nothing to arbitrage. So it's all dependent on everyone else at the same time. So this is the environment we ended up with. We call it fruit market. There, in the version that we used for the paper, it was a 10-player game. The version that we're going to release, it's a 16-player version. This is the one, actually, the nicer looking one that we're going to release very soon now, probably possibly tomorrow or maybe next week. It's going to be on GitHub. And in the paper, we used independent DMPO agents, though that doesn't matter anymore, it turns out. We've now replicated it with other RL agents, so it doesn't actually matter which RL agent you use, which I think fits with how we think about it. It shouldn't be specific to one particular algorithm. We've replicated it now with A3C. And this is now how it works. Okay, so there are 2 resources that grow slowly on trees, apples and bananas. The action space is that there are 7 different movement actions of turning and standing still and moving in all different directions. There's no harvest action. What they do is they kind of touch the tree. If the tree has fruit on it, then they will eventually harvest it. They harvest probabilistically on every step. So they have to wait a variable amount of time to harvest. There are, and then there's 2 consumption actions, which you could have an eat apple action and an eat banana action. Actually, you have an inventory, right? So once you kind of grab something, then it goes into your inventory, which the agents can see. And then there are 18 offer actions for proposing trades. These are structured like this. They are proposing trades to agents that are nearby them in a radius roughly that size. Each of the actions has semantics listed here. So one of those actions means I offer you 1 apple for 1 banana. Another one means I offer you 2 apples for 2 bananas, and so on. All those possibilities up to 3. That's how you get 18. Offers are visible to nearby agents. And once they choose it, they just kind of stay active for a while you move around and do things. And if 2 agents are near each other and they make inverse offers, so like I'm saying, I'll give you 2 apples for 3 bananas, and you're saying, I'll give you 3 bananas for 2 apples, then the trade happens immediately and the objects move between our inventories. And they're binding, it's not cheap talk. And so, of course, if agents were all the same as each other, there would be no reason to trade. To create a reason to trade, we have to give them some difference in preferences and skills. And so what we did was make it so half of them are good at producing apples, so they have a high probability of per step of harvesting an apple when they're doing that. But they get more reward for eating bananas, and then the others are the other way around. So they're good at harvesting apples but want bananas, and then good at harvesting bananas but want apples. Those are the 2 types. So this is just the specific numbers of exactly what I just said. Okay. So what can you actually do? Let's say you're an apple farmer. So there's basically 2 broadly different policies that you can apply. One is you can just produce for your own consumption. This leads to the equilibrium we call the autarkic equilibrium. It's basically the bad equilibrium, the one that we don't want to happen in this work. But what it is agents will they just kind of, since if you're an apple farmer, you want bananas, though you're good at getting apples. You can just go to banana trees and slowly harvest them and collect the rewards. And that's what they end up doing, or some mixture or something like that. But they don't trade. That'll give them some reward, but it doesn't. But no one trades if everyone's doing that. Or there are trading equilibria where individuals are doing policies where they, if you're an apple farmer, you're good at producing apples. You want bananas, but what you do is you produce lots of apples and you don't eat them. And then you find a banana farmer who has lots of bananas that you do want, and you negotiate a trade. And then you get to eat lots of high reward bananas, and you get much, much higher reward. And they get much higher reward too, because they want apples that you traded them for the bananas. So everyone is better off. It's a Pareto improvement. Public goods are very nice because it's easy to find, because there are Pareto improvements in this kind of perfect competition type of space. Most of the work we've done has been in a more social dilemma type world where you get market failures and things, and you don't get these kind of everyone better off type outcomes. But here, this is what happens, which is expected, I should say. So what are the results? So trading emerges and it is rewarding. This is the collective reward. This is just like the utilitarian sum of everyone's rewards. If you let them trade, if you turn off trading, then you get, whatever that number is, 5,000. And if you allow trading to be on, you get 10,000. So it's a pretty big gap. And you find also, this is the other plot there is showing the that it's kind of showing how they negotiate the prices over the course of learning. Like they sort of explore different prices, and then they kind of converge to something. And in this case, it was probably a map where there was an equal percentage of apples and bananas. So they ended up just finding the fastest way to exchange them as fast as they could, which is 3 for free in their action space. Next thing we did is you can measure supply and demand curves here. The way you do this is with a set of independent experiments. Each of those circles represents an independent experiment where you change either the proportion of apple trees or, well, you change the proportions of apple and banana trees, basically. And you can kind of treat those as either a shock to supply or the demand from whoever's perspective you're talking about, and end up plotting these kind of curves. And they look exactly as you expect from a intro economics class, which was pretty cool. If you want, at the end, you can ask me more about this. There were many different ways to change things and get different elasticities out, which was pretty interesting. And I felt like we learned a lot about opportunity cost and gained some intuition from it. But I'll do that if people are interested. Last thing to say on results, really, because we have 5 minutes, is this arbitrage merchant-like behavior. So the way this worked is we made a map like this, where there were 3 compartments, one that's mostly apples on the left, one that's mostly bananas on the right, and then one that's equal in the middle, and it's more sparse, I should say. And this is what happens. Is another view of it. There's you see red things on the left, that's apples, and green things on the right, those are the bananas or whatever. And agents are the things that are moving. So they can't walk through the walls, but they can trade over the walls. So basically, the players in the middle can trade to either side by walking around their space, but the players that are on the apple-rich region or the banana-rich region can't get through. And what you find is that the ones in the middle end up learning this kind of merchant-like strategy where they they basically don't harvest at all themselves anymore, and they just specialize in trading because they can buy low and sell high for the good that they want, and by running back and forth through that middle area, which was probably the coolest thing that emerged here. Again, it's not surprising, right? Because this is exactly what you would expect to happen from any intro economics class, but it's cool that it worked, and it's a different method for getting to these kind of results. Yeah, I'll basically just wrap up because we probably have 5 minutes, and I'll take some questions, I guess. The cool thing about this with private goods was we were able to show these kind of layers of compounding innovation that were kind of causally related to the changes that the other agents put in, and things that the other agents were doing at the kind of previous stage. Like you couldn't get that arbitrage behavior until you get the 2 price equilibria on either side, and you couldn't learn to trade until you've learned to not immediately eat things. Right? There's a sequence of things that have to happen. Right. So this is the last slide here. I should just leave this up while we talk about things. So the main point was, I think we should build a MAGI, a multi-agent artificial general intelligence. I think it can be ultimately more human-like, more human compatible, and more scalable. And I think this bidirectional connection with economics is really interesting. Here we were really inspired by ideas flowing from economics, but the kind of methods we ended up with potentially could be useful for something on the other side. Maybe that's a question for all of you, actually. Yeah.